Hey folks, it's Rob Flux with another Sunday session, and today we're talking about how to actually scale your projects, how and when to actually do that. Now, there's quite a bit involved in this particular topic, and apologies for that small little technical glitch we had a moment ago. Hopefully that didn't throw anybody off, but there's quite a bit to this, but it is relatively simple in concept to actually learn, but the intricacies are in the detail. So let's take a few steps back before we actually lock into, I guess, the actual mechanism of it. Let's firstly look at what it is that we're trying to do in the first place, because I think it's really important to actually understand where we're trying to go. You see, just like a GPS needs to know two exact things. The first thing is exactly where you want to go. So not just the suburb, but it needs to know the actually exact address. And the other thing it needs to know is exactly where you are right now. And if you don't know those things, then the GPS doesn't know how to actually navigate you there. So we need to do the exact same thing for us. And at each step of the way, as we progress along our journey, just like the GPS, we need to keep checking in. Where are we in relation to where we're going, and deviate ourselves back onto the course. That's the process. So what we're going to do is look at the mechanism that actually sits behind that. Now, obviously, the goal that all of us are looking to do is actually try to get ourselves financially free. That is the ultimate outcome that everybody is actually aiming for. However, what really is financial freedom? Okay, so it is not somebody leaning in on their Learjet or standing in front of their shiny car or this fancy big house. What it is actually enough passive income to actually pay your debts. Now, that for most people is actually not that hard to actually achieve, because the Australian average income is somewhere around the 80 to 85,000 per year, and the majority of us are actually living within our means, which means that most of our bills to put food on the table, fuel in the car, pay the mortgage, all those sorts of things are typically under that 85K if we're an individual, and probably under the 150 odd K if we're a family. Which means that we actually don't need a huge amount of passive income to actually generate wealth. So, as I said, real wealth actually comes from the passive income that's going to come from keeping our stock. Now, the challenge there is, well, when do we keep the stock? How do we do that? Do we jump in early? Do we wait, I guess, a little further in the process? Now, if you're an investor, you're going to have a very slightly different position on where this is actually going to land. So an investor tends to, I guess, come up with a deposit, choose the right location, be able to service the loan, and then, I guess, choose the right location to actually invest in that, and then wait for the market to do the heavy lifting. Now, as a property developer, we're going to do exactly the opposite. What we're going to do is we're going to take a short-term view of things, and we're going to force the value onto the property through the property development process, which means we have to have a slightly different perspective on this. Now, ultimately, we actually do want to become an investor, as crazy as it sounds, but we don't want to, I guess, keep the stock too early in the process. And that's one of the things that I do see fairly regularly is people might do a small duplex or a 1 or 2 subdivision and decide that they actually want to keep some of the stock. The problem is that that ties up our resources very, very fast, and we come to a grinding halt. So let's go through, I guess, one at a time, what all the different elements are. Okay, so firstly, let's look at the steps in order to get to financial freedom. The first one, step one, you want to learn the trade. You want to learn the skills that you're going to use to actually execute your chosen strategy. You want to earn enough in that first deal, first 2 deals, to at least duplicate your current wage. And if you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to start to build up a nest egg, and you've still got your day job, and this extra income, a side hustle for want of a better word, then starts to fill up your kitty, so that now you're starting to get some good cash reserves. Okay. And you want to do that at least once, preferably twice, because you want to prove that it wasn't a fluke in actually doing that. So don't be too quick in jumping and leaving your day job straight away. Now, at some point during the process, once you've proven that you can actually do this repeatedly, you potentially will reach a stage called financial independence. Now, some people will skip this. So this is not a mandatory element. Some people will skip this. But what you're going to do with financial independence is you're going to say, well, I can actually duplicate my day job through my property development process. I can actually duplicate that. I've proven it over and over again. As a matter of fact, I can probably earn more money than my day job. So you're going to swap your day job for your property development job. You're just going to swap those over. Now, at this point, you still have a job. You still have to work, but at this point, it's your time that is now dedicated to the pursuit of this financial freedom, okay? And you're putting 100% of that time into the property development process instead of, I guess, 40 hours a week or 50, 60, depending upon how many hours a week you work for your boss. Now what you're able to do is put those 40 to 60 hours per week into your property development process. That means you're no longer working for the man, and you can actually be in pursuit of your dreams all by yourself. Now, at this point, 100% of the time goes towards it, but you have to make sure at this point, it's actually going to start to hurt, right? Because at this point, you're actually starting to bleed down. So you're going to go into a negative, what I call a cash burn scenario, because you still have bills, you still have to put food on the table, you still have to put fuel in the car, you still have to send the kids to school. So you're going to start to deplete that little nest egg that you built up in stage one, in the hope that when you run your next project, you'll replenish that and some, okay? So you want to be super careful there. The only way that this actually works is if the size of the project that you're doing is bigger than the size of the projects that you're doing previously, or you're doing more of them. That's the other alternative to that. Either way, what we're trying to do is we're going to start to try and build a capital base. Now, the reason we want to build a capital base is it allows us to do two things, okay? So the first thing it allows us to do is actually have deposits in order to go and buy properties. The second thing it allows us to do is actually run larger deals. Now, larger deals require more capital. So in stage three, you get to this tricky scenario where you're making decisions to say, do I want to cash in now and consume some of that equity, or instead do I want to reload that into a larger project and build the equity a little bit faster? Step four then is when you actually decide that you're going to convert that capital base into the residual income, and I'm going to walk through a magic formula that I've got to try and assist you in doing that much faster. But at this point, if you can actually do that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to convert that capital base into the residual income, and then that positive cash flow is then going to start to pay off that little those bills and that sort of thing that we're talking about before. And if we can get enough residual income, then that's when we actually reach step five. Step five is truly financial freedom, where you've got enough passive income to pay those bills. And then step six, for those of you who really want to chase that, would actually then be the pursuit of lifestyle. That's when you do pursue the nice house. That's when you do pursue the nice car, the Learjet, all those sorts of things. That's more, I guess, many, many stages into the process. However, in doing that, I guess, as I touched on before, there's a couple of factors that we want to actually start to consider, right? So firstly, have we got enough money to actually do this? Because each time we go into a project, that consumes some cash. Secondly, do we have the skills in order to step up and actually do these things? Now, I'm going to start with the second one first, because to me, it is probably the most critical in the entire process to actually do. So for anyone who comes through our property development formula program, what we do is we give them some insights into how they can actually build a 5-year property action plan, which looks at how do you actually start to scale your projects. Now, really important, I can't legally give people, I guess, a financial plan to do that, but we give them the tools that they can actually build that themselves. And so that 5-year property action plan is taking the development strategy that you've chosen, and it allows you to, I guess, plan out how and when you're going to step up the deal size, step up a deal size, and step up a deal size, with the eventual goal of doing a project that is large enough that when you finish the project, you can actually keep one of your projects, one of your properties for stock. Now, for anyone who's been following me for a while, you'll know that there is a magic formula that sits behind that. Now, the most common question that I ask my audience is, how much profit on cost does a typical property developer actually aim for? And when I stick my hand out like this to the audience, almost in unison, every single one of them will respond with almost exactly the same number, and that is 20% profit on cost. So based on a 20% profit on cost model, then the magic number that I want you to remember is the number 6. Okay, so the number 6 says, so that's 6. The number 6 says that if I sell down 5, it will pay down the costs, and then the 6th one should be owned free and clear, or thereabouts. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a couple of little idiosyncrasies that sit behind that, with paying taxes and that sort of thing along the way. But the main concept that I want you to think about here is, if you're keeping the 6th one, you don't actually cash it in. And because you don't actually cash it in, at this point, you're not realizing your profit. So when you don't realize your profit, you've effectively go into a tax deferral scheme. So you're going to defer the tax to some point in the future, if and when you ever sell the property. And what that means is that your property is a 100% owned outright. So that's the first thing. You get to keep 100% of the profit of the deal in the property. You're not actually cashing in and paying tax. You're not paying GST. You're not paying company tax, and you're not paying income tax when you actually push it through. Because when you start to do that, what tends to happen is that 100% of profit that you had starts to get eroded, and the cash that you actually get left in the pocket typically is somewhere around the 55 to 60% of the actual profit that you actually earned from the deal. So if we can keep it, that means we're keeping 100% of the property, the profits in the property. And if you treat that as an investment at this point in time, just like any other investment, it will double with the market every 7 to 10 years, and it's actually going to start to accumulate. And so you'll actually start to build wealth. Okay, wealth is the difference between wealth and financial freedom. Wealth is when you are asset rich. Financial freedom is when you're cash flow rich. Okay, so it's going to help you to start to build wealth. The other thing is, because it's owned outright, it is now 100% passive income. Now, if you have a look at the typical rents that are around the country, if you're in any of the 4 major capital cities, so that would be Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, or Perth. They're the 4 major growth, categories all the way around the country. If you're in any of those, then typically you're going to get somewhere around the 20 to 25K mark net from any property that you own outright, if it's either a townhouse or a house. Okay, so very good, which means that for most people, remember I said before, the Australian average income is about 85K. When you get some couples together, most people need to own somewhere between 3 and 5 properties, which means that you want to start to do somewhere between 3 to 5 of those 6-pack type projects in order to get there. And then you step it back a little bit and say, well, if I want to learn how to do a 6-pack, maybe I should do a smaller version of that, would be a 4-pack. Maybe I then want to do a smaller version of that, which might be a duplex or a 1 into 2 subdivision or something along those lines. So that's the concept. That's the mechanism. We want to start small and start to step up, and then start to step up, and then start to keep. The challenge that I tend to see in the community, though, is they don't actually put a 5-year property action plan together, and instead they're a little bit ad hoc in their process. And so they start to look at things about how and when they actually try to keep properties a little bit too early in the process. Now, here's the thing that I want everyone to know, that when you're starting to run projects, there are 3 lots of cash that you actually want to start to know about. And then there's also 3 stages that you need to know about it. So the 3 types of cash: you need a deposit or equity in order to purchase the property. You need serviceability in order to service the debt. And then you need liquid cash in order to run the deal. Now, that's the 3 elements of cash that you actually need. Then the next thing is 3 stages. So you're going to purchase the property as a raw site. You're going to then do a construction type loan. And then lastly, are you keeping any of the residual stock? So you need to think about all 3 stages and all 3 lots of money at each of the stages when you're actually assessing your deal. So in doing so, I want you to always consider the construction requirements of the deal and not just the initial purchase of the raw site, which I see many, many, many people actually start to do. Now, when you start to look at the construction side of things, then you're going to start to see you're going to need a lot more equity and you're going to need a lot more liquid cash in order to get there. And so that starts to then become the bottleneck where most people start to fall over, is to say, well, I don't have the deposit and I don't have the equity. What do I start to do? So if I look at a typical journey that I see, I guess, a good majority of the people in our community start to take, they will start on a small, then a medium, then a large type project. But the way they fund their deal, now this is not my recommendation, this is just my observation of what I actually see in the community. So firstly, they will attempt to do residential loans. Reason why they want to do residential loans is the deposit is much, much cheaper. And equally, the interest rate is much, much cheaper. And so the attractiveness of that is to then say, well, it's going to be more profitable if I actually run the deal that way. And it's true that those facts are actually true. The challenge with that is that the bank needs to see, I guess, the solid 20% deposit, and it needs to see the debt servicing of the loan, which means that for many people out there, they don't actually have those two things. Now, remember, a bank is trying to assess you for a 20 to 30 year loan. So they're wanting to make sure that you can actually afford to pay that property off for the next 20 to 30 years. The challenge then becomes, well, if I don't have the deposit and I don't have the equity, I need to start to partner up. And so I see lots of people start their property development journey by joint venturing with a money partner. As a matter of fact, I would say 70 to 80% of the people that I see come through my community tend to do the joint venture money partner type route. Now, what that does is it means you go arm in arm with somebody that's going to share the profits in the deal with you. Now, by sharing the profits, it's typically on those smaller early projects, it's typically a 50-50 profit split. So when you start to look at that, you're giving a lot of your cash away in the very early stages. So that's okay. It's allowing you to step into the process. It's allowing you to start moving. And so you can start your journey. And in doing so, you're learning the skills. Remember, I said before, you need to learn the skills. You also need to, I guess, earn the cash along the way as you're going. So sharing with the money partner allows you to learn the skills and keep some of the cash, not all the cash. So that's kind of project number one, sometimes even project number two. Next step is people tend to say, well, I still like that residential loan type capacity. However, I've actually earned some money from the previous deal. I actually have a little bit of an nest egg sitting there right now. And so I don't need all of that money partner. Instead, I might try to still have a money partner, but not as a joint venture. Instead, I might do that as a private loan. Now, in doing that as a private loan, you tend to pay a lot higher interest rates because remember that they're coming in at that raw land size stage, which means that there's no development approval. They're taking as much risk into the deal that you are. So I tend to see people paying 10, 15, and 20% interest rates on that, what is called equity type loan, okay? Then but when you start to pay those higher interest rates on the equity, I guess you're still using your residential loan to purchase the balance of the debt. And when you blend that out, it's actually not too bad. And the profit that you get to keep in your pocket is much, much more than the profit that you would keep if you did a joint venture and did a 50-50 profit split. So whilst the interest rate starts to sound a little bit hairy, the actual cash that you keep in your pocket is much better. Then they start to go into the next stage, which says, well, now I'm starting to earn more money. I've got more cash in the bank. Now I want to try and get the residential loan thing again. But the problem here is they start to scale, and the residential loan guys go, hang on, you can't go more than three properties in a project, sometimes four, depending upon the bank. And so you hit this glass ceiling with regards to that, and you eventually are going to then have to transition across to commercial loans. Now, when you go to commercial loans, they assess the deal very, very, very differently. What they're really looking at is, look, I want a much larger deposit. Typically, they want 30% of the total development cost. they're going to look at the deal itself and a lot less on the serviceability side of things. Okay, so the thing that starts when you're in the residential side of things, the thing you need all three of those cashes. You need the deposit, you need the liquid cash, and you also need the serviceability. When you get to commercial, what you really need is the equity or deposit and the liquid cash, and the serviceability starts to disappear. And so it starts to become a lot easier to start to scale your projects. So the sooner you can start to look at commercial, while the interest rates are higher, their freedom in looking at your circumstances are a little bit better for you to actually do that. So each time you're coming into a process, coming into a deal, you need to start to say, well, where am I sitting in there? Remember I said that GPS scenario? You want to start to look at, okay, right here, right now, do I have the liquid cash? Do I have the equity? Do I have the serviceability? How do I need to actually fit into this process? Now, to try and help you out with here, one of the things that I want to do is I want to give you all a copy of my financial position template. Okay, so this, what this does is it basically captures your assets and your liabilities. It also captures your budget, and it allows you to do a self-assessment every single time you're actually going into a deal to determine, are you going into the deal and not overcommitting yourself? So you need to actually understand, am I overcommitting myself before going in? Okay, so understand, I want to step up from a deal size skill perspective, but how much skill, how much cash does that require for each of the stages? And then look at your own personal circumstances and say, have I actually got that? Now, in doing that, there are really three things that kill your deal. So when you look doing that self-assessment, there are three things that kill your ability to start to scale. So do you have the equity to step up? That's the first one. Do you have the liquid cash in order to run the deal? And can you service the debt? Now, remember, if when I touched on the commercial side of things, that servicing the debt starts to go away. And while you might pay a little bit more interest rate, your ability to step up is much better. Now, because those three elements are sitting there, when people start to keep properties too early in the process, what it does is it actually consumes the equity that you actually need, and it also consumes your borrowing capacity. So when you're looking at those three elements, all three of them are actually now gone because you don't have them anymore. So if you keep a project too early, then it's going to consume those. Instead, if you keep to the model that I touched on before, where you keep the magic number of 6, then you're paying down the debt. You're actually releasing all the cash that you actually put back in, and you're now keeping a property owned outright. It is much cleaner, much easier, much faster to actually start to scale, and you don't start hitting those scalability limits. Now, that said, there are antidotes to those problems that I just touched on. So firstly, money partners. Now, I said before, you might do a money partner as a 50-50 JV, but now you're giving away a lot more profit. So if you keep a property too early, you must have a money partner or you're kind of stuck. So now you go back to, I need to share more profits again. Instead, if you had in the early days cashed in, put that cash in your bank, you may not have needed the money partner as a JV. You might have graduated up to the next stage, and that next stage might be money partner as a loan, right? As an equity loan more than anything else. The other antidote to those three missing elements is, a creative acquisition of the property. Now, you've heard me talk about low and no money down deals in the past. So there are 7 different ways that you can actually control a property rather than owning it. So you might do a joint venture with the landowner, never have to purchase it. So if you never have to purchase it, you don't need a deposit, you don't need the serviceability. So very, very creative. If you're doing an option contract, you are delaying the purchase to a later point in time, in which case you might be able to, through the development approval process, add a bit of soft equity, because that development approval will revalue the property, which means maybe you don't need the equity element anymore because that soft equity might be enough. You might do a delayed settlement with early access, which means that if the delay is long enough, maybe it's a 9-month project and you've negotiated 12-month delayed settlement, you might be able to finish the project and be selling the finished product and actually pay for it with the income from the sale of the finished product. And there's many, many more, folks. I'm not going to go into all of them, but basically those creative acquisition models can help and are highly encouraged to allow you to actually start to scale with, I guess, different elements of the process. Now, so as I said, residential, you're going to start to get a glass ceiling with regards to, hey, have I got my serviceability? You're going to have a glass ceiling with how many projects you can actually start to do. So you're going to start that journey on the residential side of things, but you want to try and transition to commercial much, much sooner so that they're not looking at the serviceability as much as humanly possible, which means that you don't need a day job. So when you went through those stages before and you swapped your property development job for your normal day job, commercial loans at this point are your savior. The problem is commercial loans require a lot more equity. Okay, so let's use a very basic example. So if you have $1 million property that you would purchase, now under residential, that would be a $200K deposit and $800K of debt. You might have $1 million worth of construct and $200K worth of liquid cash. So that's a total development cost of $2.2 million. That's the $1 million to purchase, the $1 million to construct, and $200K of liquid cash. So TDC of 2.2. Now, if you're looking at this from a residential perspective, you would only need the $200K deposit and you'd only need the $200K liquid cash plus the serviceability in order to run that. Okay. If you look at this from a commercial aspect, they would want 30% of the TDC, the total development cost. They'd want 30% of that 2.2 million. So they would want 660K. And you go, I need more cash. This is crazy. I can do the residential with way less cash. I can do that with 400 cash, but I go to the commercial and I need 660 cash. That's just crazy. Well, if you look at it from that perspective, you do need to actually come up with more. However, what it does is it unlocks the size of the deal. You are no longer limited to that 3 dwelling type capacity. And now you can actually step up to a much, much bigger loan. You could do 6 packs, 10 packs, whatever it is, subject to your skills, if you can actually get your TDC actually sitting there. Now, that said, I guess that's going to take some time to actually, get to that stage. So you want to start to, in those early stages, you're going to keep the nest egg as much as you can in order to get there. Now, as you start to get there, when you've got those larger nest eggs, that commercial just suddenly unlocks all sorts of things, and the profits that you get from those larger projects are like drinking from a fire hose. Okay, so the amount of cash that actually comes back from a 4-pack or a 6-pack and that sort of thing is much, much bigger. Now, that said, all of that is to, I guess, start to say, well, where is that junction point that I'm actually going to start to transition across? Now, when you start to look at that from a deal perspective, every time you want to actually go into a deal, there's some elements that you're going to need, primarily the liquid cash to actually run, things like stamp duties and application fees and all that sort of thing. And you start to hit these glass ceilings where the liquid cash starts to be the thing that actually starts to slow you down the most. So you want to start to get to a position where you are still working with money partners, but they are not in a joint venture capacity, but instead they are in private lending type capacity where they're lending you cash into your deal. If you haven't actually generated the profits from that, that will then allow you to leapfrog. So if you can get the private equity and actually run that from that perspective, you're paying interest on a much smaller amount. While you're paying a high interest rate, it's on a much smaller amount. So the profits that you actually keep, as I said, starts to grow significantly. Now, as I said, the key outcome here is we want to get to a point where we can do that 6-pack type project. And so the first time you actually start to do that, don't stress too much about the fact that you've had to borrow a whole bunch of equity to go in, because you're not sharing profit. What you're doing is you're actually paying an interest rate. What you're really doing is trying to keep that one at the end. Remember that the goal of that is to not cash it in. And if you can do that enough times, then you'll actually get there. So in order to do that, make sure that you are, setting yourself a 5-year property action plan that determines how and when you are actually going to step up at each stage. Make sure you know exactly how many projects you need, exactly what your deal size should be at this one point in time from a skills perspective. and take a hard look using that financial position template that I touched on before. And here's the link again for that. Make sure you take a hard look at, well, where am I short? Do I need to have a joint venture partner where I'm going to arm in arm, go in and spend 50% and share 50% of the profit? Or do I want to say, well, I might pay a higher interest rate for the money partner to come in and give me an equity type loan? And if I can do that, that's going to allow me to not have to share as much profit, which means I get to keep cash in my pocket much faster. Now, the amount of cash that you want to keep in your pocket going into any one deal depends on the deal size that you're actually going to go into in the first place. So the size of the deal is going to massively determine how much cash that you want to do. So here's just some high level concepts that I want you to start to think about. Okay, so if you're going into a 1:2 type subdivision, you're going to need typically a 20% deposit in order to do that. And you're probably going to need somewhere between 80 and 120K to actually run the deal. Now, if you're doing similar from a duplex perspective, again, you're going to need the 20% type deposit. You, depending upon the size or the I guess complexity of that duplex, are you in a more expensive area or otherwise, you might be somewhere between 80 and 150K of liquid cash that you actually need to do it. So when you start to budget yourself as you're going into each stage, that can change massively. Now, as you step up deal sizes, those start to change significantly. So if you're going to do medium lot land subdivisions, so it might be, say, somewhere between 4 and 10 lots, it's really going to come down to, are you actually starting to build a road? So the liquid cash that you're going to need in order to run that can vary significantly. So you might be somewhere between 150 and 500K as an example, as the liquid cash component that you actually need for that. If you're doing multi-res, similarly, you're probably somewhere between the 100 and 300K mark if you're going to do, I guess, larger townhouse projects, maybe some unit complexes, etc. So you can see the liquid cash starts to become a little bit more challenging. And so your ability to negotiate really great terms on your deal, where you're actually going to be negotiating long settlements or JVs with a landowner, option contracts, those sorts of things, they start to become critical, as is the ability for you to actually get money partners from the equity loan space side of things. Now, one of the things I want you to be very, very conscious of is, if we were 12 months ago, when property market was booming, everybody was paying way too much money for property. Everyone that was coming in, the vendor was in control. They were able to say, look, everyone's bidding for what I want. Why would I give you any terms at all? Okay. However, right now, the market's dropping, interest rates are going up, inflation is going up, cost of construction is going up. And so it appears on the surface of it as doom and gloom. But I want you to actually start to pay attention that the vendor who, I guess, saw the peak of the market 12 months ago still wants to achieve that price point. But they know right now that it's near on impossible to achieve unless they start to be really creative in the terms that they actually provide. So, for example, delayed settlements, for example, joint ventures, those sorts of things, the option contracts type approach. So they'll do anything they can to protect those previous high price points. And so you're going to be able to get those no and low money down deals. I'm going to say they're starting to become really, really attractive right now, but I'm going to say 6 months from now, these things are going to hit a sweet spot. So just as we're coming into December and January, these things are going to hit a massive sweet spot where the number of these deals that you can actually start to negotiate are going to go through the roof. So much so that I'm running a one-day event on that, just that alone, plus a couple of other things on the 13th of November. Make sure that you, I guess, go check that out. It's called Property Development Summit. Go to our events page, and that'll, I guess, tell you where. Here's the events page. So go to the events page. That'll tell you, I guess, how to register for that. Now, just in closing this out, I've touched on, I guess, the scaling side of things. If you keep projects too early, if you keep your profits too early, you're going to consume your equity, you're going to consume your serviceability, you're going to hit a glass ceiling, and you'll never graduate. Instead, what you want to do is you want to start to cash in. Whilst when you cash in, you're going to pay some tax. You want to cash in to get enough liquid cash to then step up your deal size. And if you can't step up your deal size, then you want to, I guess, get money partners in as equity loans to actually start to top that up. And when you start to do that, you can then step up your deal trajectory, and you're more likely to go into your commercial space. When you start to go in the commercial space, your deal size is no longer limited by your servicing capacity. And so by that, avoiding that temptation of keeping that property way too early has now enabled you to unlock an opportunity where you can actually start to do bigger deals, which then means you can start to keep more cash later on. Now, as you start to keep a property, remember anything that you, remember the 3 stages, keeping residual stock, you are effectively consuming 20% of the value of that property, irrespective of whether or not you can actually pull equity out of it or otherwise, because you can't pull that cash out. If you wanted to refinance that, typically what I see my guys do is when they keep that 6th property, what they'll typically do is they'll refinance that. They'll put a line of credit against that because it's 100% positive cash flow. They'll pull 80% of the cash out, which is access to more cash firstly than they would have if they had have sold that property down, because they would have paid GST, they would have paid company tax, they would have paid income tax. So they can actually get access to about 80% of that cash as opposed to about 55 or 60% if they had actually cashed it in. So in the early days, cash in later in the journey, you're going to try and, I guess, transition over to commercial. You may have to borrow some more equity in order to do that, and then you're going to start to ratchet that. So anyway, that's kind of the process and the journey, folks. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and jump over to Facebook and see whether or not there's any questions from anyone there. So just give me 2 secs while I do that. Well, I can't see anyone actually asking questions, folks. What I can see is a couple of people saying hi, so thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. But if you have any questions, make sure you throw them in the chat window right now to see whether or not. So Bernard says, excellent, thank you, mate. Tony says thumbs up and thank you, and smiley face. So thank you, mate, as well. Anyone else has got any questions, more than happy to do so. As I touched on, the concept is relatively simple in mechanism. The hard part is the fact that what most of us don't do is we don't check in with ourselves along the way. And because we're not checking in, we're not always going back and looking at our assets and liabilities. We're not always looking at our budget. So we're not able to see what it is we're actually short of in actually going into the next deal. Remember, to go into the next deal, you need liquid cash, you need equity, and you need serviceability. So I can see a couple of questions now starting to come through. So Carol says, is it the 13th of November or 13th of August? 13th of August, Carol. If you go to propertydevelopmentsummit.com.au, I'll put the link in the chat window a little bit later. Then I guess just go there and register. Hazram says, hi Rob, how do we go about suburb selection for a small scale development? Is school a good measure? Husman, what I would say there is you're probably looking at it more from an investment point of view as opposed to a development point. Now, I try to keep my answers to very much on topic, and that's a little bit off topic, but I answer it just out of principle to try and help you out. You really need to understand, firstly, what is your development strategy? Are you doing subdivisions? Are you doing townhouses? Are you doing apartments? Okay, so you want to then understand what is the size of the deal I'm actually going into. So that is that 5-year property action plan that I was talking about. That is your deal size, your deal trajectory. When you know what the deal size is, then you're going to start to understand, well, where does that start to work? Okay, now that deal size and that deal development strategy will not work everywhere. It'll only work in some locations. And so what you're trying to do is to say, where does that particular one work? So you're going to start to search for, or knowing what the zoning is and the land size that I need, how many of those opportunities actually exist in the area. When I know how many exist in the area, I'm going to go for where the most amount of opportunities actually exist. I'm then going to assess that particular suburb to see, is there any evidence that anyone's done it before me, and prove that the evidence of them doing it before me, that they were actually profitable. You see, if they are not profitable, doesn't matter that they did it. They tried to pioneer the area. It didn't quite work. We want to actually prove that it is profitable. And if we do, and in our property development formula program, we call that our suburb selection process, and we put that in through a tool called the rough cut FISO. When you start to do that, then you're going to start to get red lights and green lights on your suburbs to say, should you actually be farming in this area? Now, obviously, when you've got an area where the suburb makes sense, then of course, being in a good school zone is going to help massively to differentiate, I guess, one property over and above another one in the same suburb. But that in itself is not the one and only determining factor. There's many, many things that actually go in there, and supply and demand is primarily, I guess, the bulk of it. So Juliet has a question. So Juliet says, brilliant session. Thank you. We'll rewatch. You're more than welcome. Roshan says, great session, Rob. When would you say would be the ideal time to start scaling across different strategies? Roshan, I would say always one strategy. So I'm not going to say across different strategies, but I want you to start to do, I guess, a small, medium, and large type approach. Okay. Now, for some people, they need to do a couple of small and a couple of medium before they go to the large. Some people already have some experience coming in, but I want you to start to step up slowly, slowly, slowly. It's like going to the gym, picking up a 5 kilo weight, putting it down, picking up a 10 kilo weight, putting it down, picking up a 20 kilo, putting it down. What you don't do is go to the other arm who did no exercise and then try to pick up a 20 kilo weight, because it's not going to do it. Okay. Dan says, Rob, how frequently would you seek to refinance to get the best rates? So Dan, what you're talking about there is really from an investment perspective. So if you're doing investments, you should always be looking at that every 6 months or so at most. Typically, you're going to need to at least hold on to the loan for at least 12 months. Otherwise, they'll probably have penalties and clawbacks and that sort of thing. So for the loan, so you don't want to go in a little bit too early, but you should always be looking at any stock that you're actually keeping. You want to be assessing that at least every 6 months. Margaret said, needed that info details, Rob. Thank you very much. You're more than welcome. Lloyd says, thank you very much as well. So not many questions today, folks. So I'm going to say thank you all very much. I'm going to bid you all farewell. It's been great. And I will see you at our next Sunday session next week. Until then, bye for now, folks. Bye.